How's it going? My name's Josh, and today we'll be setting up a 2D character for our Unreal Engine 4 Android game. So what we're going to be doing is creating our character blueprint and setting up the basic animations. Then we'll chuck in a camera and some lighting and test what we've got. So go ahead and launch the engine and create a new blank project for mobile and tablet and give it a name. Once that loads up, you can create your character blueprint. If you're new to the engine, Blueprints is a visual scripting system that allows you to use nodes to create gameplay elements for your game. So our character blueprint will be where we script the behavior for our player character. To learn more about blueprints, you can go and check out the Intro to Blueprints tutorial series on the Unreal Engine YouTube page. Alright, so we'll go ahead now and create our character blueprint by right-clicking in the content browser and selecting Blueprint Class. Then expand the All Classes drop-down and search for Paper Character. The paper character blueprint is very similar to the default character blueprint, the main difference being that it uses a 2D sprite component instead of a 3D model. So select that and give it a name. It's always a good idea to get some kind of naming convention in place early on, that way it makes it easier to navigate through your project when you come back to it each time. So we want to start by getting our 2D textures imported, that way we can get our animation set up so we can have something to look at when we're testing. If you're not sure what kind of game you plan on making yet, or what the character will look like, you can just use placeholder textures for the time being. There'll be a download link for all of the textures that I've used in this tutorial, which will be available in the description. I'll also be going over my approach to creating animations in a later episode. So if you're interested in watching that, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be alerted when that arrives. Alright, so now go and import the textures by dragging and dropping them into the content browser. Then select them all and right click them. Then go to Sprite Actions and select Apply Paper 2D Texture Settings to optimize the texture settings for 2D. At this point, I like to start setting up a folder hierarchy to keep the project clean, and color coding the folders can make things super readable and easy to find. The content browser is where all of the content for your game is kept, so it's important to keep it well structured and organized so that you know where to find things. Now if you select all of the textures for the idle animation and right click them, go up to Sprite Actions and hit Create Sprite. This will take out textures and create assets that have collision and can be rendered in the world and have physics applied to them. So if we then select our sprites and right click them and select Create Flipbook, all of our sprites will be added to a flipbook, which is the 2D equivalent of an animation asset. So now we can head over to our character blueprint by double clicking it in the content browser, and then inside of our blueprint we want to go to the components panel on the side and select the sprite component. Then in the details panel on the other side, you want to set the source flipbook to be the flipbook that we just created, and it should appear in the viewport. So you can scale this fella down a bit and then select the capsule component and change its size to fit the dude where you want his collision to be by changing the capsule half height and radius values. Also make sure you position the sprite where you want it. At the moment the character's in grayscale, so we'll come back to our sprite and set the sprite color to be a sort of orange color to give him a bit of a fire look. We can use the sprite color variable and make color themes later on to provide in-app purchase options for our game. This is another thing that we'll be covering in a later episode of the series. But for now, we just want to come back over to the components panel and making sure that nothing's selected, we want to add a component and select spring arm. Rotate it to be coming in the direction that the player is facing, and then with the spring arm still selected, add another component and search for camera. Doing this will add a camera as a child component of the spring arm. The spring arm is going to be a camera boom, like a big stick that the camera is attached to, which we'll use because it offers us more control over how the camera moves in relation to the player, which will become very useful later on. So now if you select the camera and go into the details panel, you can set the projection mode to be orthographic. This will render everything in 2D along a principal plane. So that means that everything facing the camera will be rendered flat along the x-axis. Alright, so then you can set the ortho width. The ortho width will determine how much of your scene is rendered by the camera. So changing this will effectively be like zooming in and out. You can tweak this to what you want later once we've tested what we have. So you can go ahead now and add a point light as a child component of the camera by adding it while the camera is selected. Then you want to drop the intensity so that the light's not so bright, change the color, and decrease the attenuation radius so that the area that the light encompasses is smaller. And you also want to disable cast shadows. I'll also move the light back from the camera because I don't want the light source to be rendered on the screen. So then I'll move the camera forward so that the light is closer to the player. Keeping in mind that in orthographic projection mode, the depth is dictated by the ortho width and isn't affected by the camera's position along the y-axis. Keep in mind that I'm showing you these settings so that you can follow along and make a game that is similar to mine. You should choose settings that are appropriate for your game and that fit your concept. So before we can test this, we need to set up our sprite material, because by default, the sprite material that's being used is unlit, so it will render fully bright. If you're unfamiliar with what materials are, basically, a material is an asset that can be applied to objects in the world to control their visual appearance. So you want to head back over to the content browser, and then in the bottom right hand corner, you want to click on the View Options menu. And then you want to select Show Engine Content and Show Plugin Content. So then you want to scroll down to Paper 2D Content, and you want to make a copy of the default sprite material and move it to our content folder and rename it. Now double click it to open the material editor and click on the result node. Now in the details panel on the left here, you want to check that the shading model is set to default lit. Then, while holding Control, click and drag to move the output of the top multiply node from emissive to base color. This way, our objects will be reflecting light instead of emitting it. It's also important to set the roughness to have a value of 1 and the specular to have a value of 0. You can do this by adding two constant vectors by holding one on your keyboard and clicking in the graph twice. Set the value of the first to be 0 and plug that into the specular, and set the other to be 1 and plug that into roughness. Make sure that you hide the engine and plugin content by going back into the view options in the content browser and unchecking them so that they aren't found when searching for our content. So now you just got to remember to apply our material to anything that gets placed in the world. When that's all done, we can test to see that our lighting is working. But first, you want to go to Settings and go Preview Rendering Level, Mobile/HTML5, and select Android Preview. This will set the preview rendering level in the editor to be the same as on Android devices. After that, we can create a new empty level and drop in our character. With our character selected, head over to the details panel on the side here and search for Auto Possess Player. Then set this to player 0 so that our character receives input when the game is played. So now save the level and click play, and you should notice that our lighting is working. Another thing that you'll notice is that the player falls straight down into darkness. To stop this from happening, and to test that the lighting will affect our environment, we'll create a tilemap. A tilemap provides a quick and easy way to lay out a framework for 2D levels. We'll set this up by importing a ground texture. I've just opted to go with a 64 by 64 pixel grey square. Right click the texture and under Sprite Actions, select Create Tileset. Open the tileset and set the tile size to be the same as the resolution of the texture. Then click Add Box to add some collision and save. Now right click on the tileset and click Create Tilemap. Now open the tilemap and in the Details panel, adjust the collision thickness and set values for height and width to suit your needs. Also set the tile height and width to be the same as the texture resolution. Then click to select the square over on the left here, and then click and drag in the main area to Paint to Layout. Remember to assign our material to it and save. Then if you go back into the level, you can drop it in and line it up nicely. We want our player to be just a unit or two behind the environment. And then finally, I'll add some post-process effects to the camera. I'm going to add some bloom and crank the value right the way up just to test that it's working. So go ahead and test again after these changes. If you test and it doesn't look any different, you may need to go into Settings and under the Rendering tab, enable Mobile HDR. This setting is required for more advanced lighting and shadows as well as post-process effects. Enabling this will affect the performance, particularly on older devices, so only use it if there are features in your game that require it. If this setting wasn't enabled and you've just enabled it, you'll need to restart the engine and wait for shaders to compile. But that should do it for this episode. You should now have an animated 2D character with a camera and lighting, as well as a very basic environment. In the next episode, we'll set up the movement input for our character, the touch interface, as well as deploying our game to our Android device for the first time. Remember that the download links are in the description, and keep an eye out for the rest of the episodes in this tutorial series. You can subscribe and hit the notifications if you want to be alerted when the next episodes come out. Other than that, cheers for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.